I'm Rachel from Play Africa, and I'm so pleased that you've joined us this afternoon for the third session in our webinar series. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to learning about building and making with young children myself. Big thank you, of course, to the Kohl Children's Museum for partnering with us with this really exciting webinar series. It's been so much fun, and I've learned so much. Just a note for all of you attending today, or if you attended one of the previous sessions, these webinars will be available on the Play Africa YouTube page later this week. I will be sending out some communication about that a little bit later. So you don't need to worry about jotting anything down right now. And I'm so excited. So I'm gonna pass it over to Emma so we can just get going.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for that kind introduction. We're super excited to be here again for this very last installment of STEM in the ECD classroom, where we will be talking today about building and designing. So again, my name is Emma Goodwin, and I'm the manager of education at the Kohl Children's Museum of Greater Chicago here in Illinois. I graduated with a Master of Arts in teaching early childhood education. And while I was doing that, I was also a preschool teacher for students aged 3 to 5. And when I'm with children, whether it's at the museum or when I was in my own classroom, my favorite activity to engage in with students was building and free play with blocks and also recycled materials, seeing the way that students decide to tinker with and combine different things to create structures or create solutions to problems. I think the creativity that we see in our kids when they're engaging in different engineering concepts is always really exciting and inspiring. So a little bit about the museum. Kohl Children's Museum, we're located in Glenview. We're just about 20 minutes northwest of Chicago. And we've got 17 different interactive exhibits. And all of our exhibits are designed for students aged birth to 8. So this exhibit specifically is called Build It. These blocks, these blue blocks that we've got, they're called Imagination Playgrounds, and they allow children to combine different materials, different shapes in a variety of ways. So the opportunities for creation and building with these are totally endless. We are always so excited to see whatever different students come up with when they're engaging in these materials. And I believe that Play Africa has these at their museum as well. So every single one of our exhibits, all of our programs, we're all looking to design and nurture this love of learning in young children. And we want this love of learning and this value of learning through play to be sustained throughout a lifetime. We want this to be something that students are really taking with them throughout the rest of their educational careers and passing down into the future generations as well. So we know that while they're coming here and they're playing and they're experiencing real world concepts in a way that's accessible and hands-on and really familiar to them, that they're learning about really key things that will be important to them later on as well. So today we're going to talk about building and designing, but first we want to kind of backtrack to review the first 2 webinars that we did in this series, again, STEM in the ECD classroom, all to launch this amazing STEM Seeds curriculum that is provided by the Play Africa team. So first we talked about the value of play, and there are so many reasons that we play with children. A lot of them I kind of touched on when I talked about the museum, but we play with children because we know that students are actively learning, growing, and developing at the same time as they play. So throughout these playful situations that we see our students engaging with, it's really educational. It's really beneficial for the children, even if we don't see it at first. We know that they're touching up to really important life skills as well as really important educational skills. Also, as teachers, we want to raise and encourage these children who will leave our classrooms and want to learn in the future. And again, this goes back to the values of the museum, but also values of teachers in general. We want to have people leave our doors who are going to have a sustained love of learning that is able to carry them throughout a lifetime. Worst case scenario, if someone goes into a classroom where they don't feel like they're able to really nurture or really play and explore, we want the passion that we ignite now to be able to sustain them through those times as well. And so by creating playful situations where our students are excited to explore, we can create those lasting connections for all of them. And also, we want to see the hard work that we do while teaching reflected in ways that we might not have anticipated. And so when I say that, I mean that we as teachers are actively pushing in a lot of vocabulary, a lot of different STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math. When we teach those to our children, we want our kiddos to have opportunities to reflect those through play. So when we give them playful situations to engage in, they're able to kind of practice those skills that they might not originally be grasping, and they're able to tinker around with them in a way that makes it easier for them to understand. And then lastly, kind of combining all of these different benefits, we know that play is a really unique opportunity for every single one of our students to develop so many different skills. And so when we're talking about that, we're talking about those math and science skills, but also social emotional skills, conversation skills, talking about literacy, talking about their ability to solve problems and their ability to work as a group. All of that is going to be addressed when we provide playful situations for our students. And then last week, we talked about the value of using repurposed materials in our classroom. And there are so many reasons why we use repurposed materials. A lot of them come down to us wanting to have better resource classrooms. But then another really key value in this is that we want to create people who care about the environment, who care about climate change and are aware of it. And one way that we can do that is by connecting our classroom to recycled materials into the natural world. So when we use repurposed materials in our classrooms, whether it's in a center or whether it's in boxes that we kind of bring out for our students to play with as a more temporary solution, or as a more temporary provocation. When we have those things that are recycled or natural, we are able to provide this connection for our students in the materials. And when we provide that for them, they're also connected to their worlds. So when we give them pine cones or seed pods, and they're able to play with those and explore with those in the classroom, they also develop an affinity for them and a care for them when they're outside. We can also increase our students' appreciation and their feeling of ownership of the different supplies that we have in our classroom. And so when we talk about wanting to have students who are really responsible for the things that are in their room, or students who are tidy and who clean up after themselves and who really care for the materials and treat them kindly, a lot of that is going to come down to them feeling connected to them and them building this connection, or the ability to collect the materials themselves. And it's a lot easier to do that and a lot more accessible for our students to do that with recycled and repurposed materials than it is with materials that we as teachers just pick out and put in the classroom for no reason. And then lastly, because our students are inherently provided with so many imagination opportunities with these open-ended materials. So they're able to imagine things that they're able to imagine things representing other things, whether that's in blocks or saying that a bean pod is a telephone. They're able to kind of create different situations or scenarios that these manipulatives or these materials can represent. And the sense of imagination is going to be really necessary in the world that we're evolving in, especially when we think about climate change and when we think about raising students who are future scientists, engineers, mathematicians. Imagination and creativity are necessary and important skills where those professions are involved. And so our students are really going to benefit from those open-ended explorations now. So today we're going to talk about building and designing and how we can ingrain those concepts of play and repurposed materials in building and designing as well. So there's a lot of different developmental benefits to building and designing. We see a ton of problem solving. So this one is, I mean, supernatural for a lot of our kiddos when they're trying to build something and it keeps falling down. They have to kind of solve that problem, figure out what the solution is to make their tower, their structure stand up. We also see an increase in confidence as well as empathy. They get so many opportunities for testing and revising, which is really important. That loops back into problem solving as well. But this ability to look at something that we've created, recognize the problems in it or the potential future problems, and figure out how we can fix it is so important. That's a skill that we as adults use all the time, and we can start pushing that in with our students now. And that connects into innovation as well. So the ability to really think and create something that's new or something that's exciting for our students and build that plan for it as well. The increased social emotional skills is going to be so pivotal. One of the feelings that we see a lot when our students are building and designing is a sense of frustration, and having our students bump up to those heavy or hard feelings and feel that frustration or feel that anger when a tower falls down is really important and really valuable, because when our students are able to experience frustration and experience anger in a classroom setting that's loving and kind and playful, they're able to overcome those feelings as well, and they're able to grow and learn from them. So they're able to take that frustration and maybe not necessarily turn it into something positive, but turn it into a learning experience where they know they can get something as an end result if they keep on working at it. And then lastly, we see a lot of curriculum and educational integration with building and designing. And so the STEM Seeds curriculum, our big focuses are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All of those are immediate when we're building and designing, when we're playing with different blocks or different things that we can engineer. We're going to see all of those skills. So whether it's our students counting how many blocks they're using, or thinking about the shapes and the sizes of the different materials that they're able to tinker with for that day. All of that curriculum and educational integration that can sometimes seem scary for us is going to be immediate and is going to be automatically connected with these concepts as well. So we're going to loop back to this. This is a spectrum that we talked about in our very first webinar, types of play in South African classrooms. And so the types of play kind of operate on this spectrum up here. So it goes from child-led play to educator-guided play. And this is going to be on page 31 of the STEM Seeds curriculum as well. And so when we think about child-led play, we are engaging in play situations that the child gets to decide on completely. So the child gets to decide what they're playing with, who they're playing with, why they're playing, how they're playing, when, what with. All of that is up to the child's discretion. How long they're playing even, that's all going to be their choice. And so that's a free play situation. We're kind of giving our students the reign and control. We're handing everything over to them for them to decide what type of play is going to work best for them. It might last 2 minutes, it might last 2 hours. Not that we all have 2 hours for that in our classroom, but really what we want to do is we want to give our students all the power that they have to make these decisions on how they're going to play in their situation. And then on the other side of things, you have educator-guided play. And so educator-guided play is when we as the teachers have ideas on what we want our students to come away with. So maybe you want your students to really develop a sense of patterning with this lesson. And so this is going to be instructional play. And what we want to focus on with educator-guided play is that even though we have the standard, or even though we have the lesson or the topic that we want our students to really bump into, we're going to do it in a way that's playful and in a way that allows them to have hands-on experience. So we're not going to sit there and show flashcards or sit there and lecture about different patterning techniques. Instead, we're going to give our students hands-on ways to explore patterning that's risk-free and that allows them to really delve into the concept while feeling like they can play around with it as well. And so in the middle of educator guided and child led, we have guided play. And so guided play is where we provide maybe different materials. We have some ideas for standards that we want to have our students focus on, but we're still allowing them to make a lot of decisions within this type of play. They're still able to really decide for themselves what they want to tinker with. And so maybe we provide certain materials in that are on ramps, but we let our students decide how they're going to explore that. And so this ends of the spectrum, these apply directly to building and designing as well. And so in this picture, you see these two girls, and they are coming up to one of the blocks tables that we had outside. And so they were able to choose exactly what they wanted to play with. There were a lot of different tables, a lot of different options, but they chose to come up to the block center. They chose how they wanted to build with these materials. They got to choose when they came to the table and when they left. They got to choose specifically what blocks within there they wanted to play with. And so this is a free play situation. They're making all the choices. And And so when we talk about building, one of the things that we will see is free building, which is when we maybe have materials set out, but we're allowing our students to play with these in any way they choose. They could have come over here and decided that this was an ice cream shop. They could have used the orange blocks that you see as cones and put blocks up on the top. And so that's totally fine because it's their choice on how they want to play. Or they could have used this as a building opportunity to create different stacks. They get to decide completely. And so because of that, this is going to fall on this left-hand side of the spectrum. It's child-led free play and free building as well. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you're going to have instructional building or more of the design process. And we're going to delve into the design process as well. And so in this example, we're providing a lot of the materials, and we know that we want our students to come into this room in the museum and explore building concepts. We want them to learn more about houses. We want them to learn more about structures and buildings and how buildings are made. We want them to learn about beams and joints and walls and roofs and windows. All of that, and different STEM concepts that are ingrained in there as well. So we see different engineering things happening here, different math concepts. You need to engage in different shape building for an effective house. And so this is going to be more instructional based. And so it's going to fall on the other side of the spectrum. And this is where we're going to be talking about the design process. So over here, we have a free building situation. And over here, we have the design process. And we're going to break down each of these as we go along. So free building with children, that's going to be, again, the one where we see the girls that are engaging with the blocks. So children are able to take building materials and use them in any way that they choose. So this could be anything. This could be cleaned yogurt containers, recycled cardboard, blocks, sticks, rocks, anything that you have at your disposal. And so in this picture, we've created, they're called Eames cards. So we took different pieces of cardboard and we cut them into squares, and then we cut different slits in them that allowed students to shimmy them together, and then they're able to make different structures with them. So we've provided the materials, but the students are able to decide completely how those materials are going to interconnect, and they're able to build whatever kind of structure they'd like, or whatever kind of art piece that they'd like as well. This could be a sculpture or it could be a person. They get to decide and tell us what they're doing. In block play and in free building, we see a lot of these same educational concepts come up. So even if it's not a specific lesson that we're pushing in, our students are still going to be bumping up to problem solving skills, counting, addition and subtraction. They're going to be doing their fine motor skills and their gross motor skills, depending on the size of what they're building with. They'll be touching and stacking and doing a lot of that, and that's going to engage their hands. But then if they're using bigger materials, they're also going to need to be doing some heavier lifting. And then they'll also be engaging in their scientific observation skills and their math skills as well by observing the different attributes and properties of what they're building with. On the other end of the spectrum, where you saw that girl that was building with the cardboard house, we have the design process. So the design process is a series of steps that we use to solve a problem. So with students, we could introduce a problem to them where we need to design something to provide a solution. This is going to be more of a provocation for thinking and creating. So this process is maybe going to be a little bit more involved than our free building situation. And it's going to be sparked by either a problem that the students notice or a problem that we want to bring to our students. And so these are two examples of lessons that we use here at the museum. So one is figuring out a way that you can create a boat that's safely going to transport a number of different animals across a river. Another one is going to be, what pet should I get? So figuring out what we need to do to build a pet carrier that will successfully transport our new pet back home. And so by introducing these problems to our students, they're able to go through this entire process of thinking that allows them to come to a natural solution. So in the STEM Seeds curriculum on page 40, we illustrate the design process and design thinking for children. And so the way that that's outlined in the curriculum is going to be first to empathize, then define, then we move into ideation. We'll see prototyping and then testing and finally sharing. And so we see here in this picture, we're going to come back to this kiddo a little bit later, but we see this blueprint here as well as him engaging in the testing with the ball. And so this is all part of the design process. So with the design process, this is all going to work together on a timeline. And so all of these 6 different steps, they're going to flow naturally into each other, but they can loop back as well. But If our students are engaging in a free play situation, we can individually integrate each of these different phases or each of these different steps into free building and free play. So today we're going to go through every phase of the design process. We're going to break it down of how you can move through them as a timeline, but we're also going to break it down of how you can engage your students in those processes when they are free building so that they're better set up for the design process eventually when you feel as though they're ready and you have ideas for how you want to engage them in that. We're not necessarily going to name the entire process or each of the phases for our students right away, and that's okay. They don't need to know that they're in the prototyping or ideation phase, especially not for our younger children. That could be something that we name later on, but for right now, it's okay for us to just ingrain them in the timeline and engage them in that free building explanation and free building expanding. So when we notice that there are components of this missing in their free play, we can integrate them through more investigative and open-ended questions, again, to allow them to feel more prepared for the design process later on. So the first step in the design process is empathize. So when we're talking about empathize, the way that it's illustrated and defined in the STEM Seeds curriculum is develop an understanding of the people who are facing the challenge at hand. Understand their thoughts, feelings, and physical and emotional needs in the context of the problem to be solved. So Blank and Lynch in Growing in STEM, the design process, engineering practices in preschool. I love this quote: an authentic design problem contextualized in children's day-to-day experiences can't help but invite consideration of who will be impacted by the different potential solutions. And so depending on the age of your students, this concept of empathy is going to be so pivotal for them. It might not be something that we see them engaging with right away, and that's okay. For my 3 to 5-year-olds, empathy was something that I really only started to see at the very, very end of the time that they spent with me towards the older 4s and 5s. That's okay. This is something that we want to develop and we want to kickstart now, even if it's a little bit more difficult for our students to process. When we start this empathy process in building and designing, it's a lot easier for our students to feel it and to contextualize it. We're providing them with real problems and real solutions. And the key is that it's maybe not necessarily a problem that they've caused. That can be a little bit more difficult for them to separate their feelings from what's happening. But in these design processes specifically, we're giving them problems that are going to be a little bit easier for them to understand, and that will make empathy come more naturally to them later on. So we're going to go through these 3 different examples of how we can use empathy as a motivation. So again, this is how we kickstart the design process. Is we're going to demonstrate a problem to our students and get them to feel what the problem is, get them to really understand how other people are feeling and how other people are impacted. And so the first one could be something like the 3 little pigs, their house keeps getting destroyed by the big bad wolf. This is a really common fable here in the United States. We see it all the time. There's 3 little pigs and they live in different structures. The big bad wolf comes and keeps destroying all of their houses, and the pigs are probably really scared and they need a house that's going to keep them safe. So we can display this problem to our students and have them really feel that fear that the 3 little pigs are experiencing. Another one could be, I notice it's really hard for your friend to reach that shelf. That must be really frustrating for her to not reach what she needs. And little kids, they totally understand this. This is something that's really easy for them to see and feel, the lack of access to different materials, especially when they're so short. This is something that will be accessible for them as far as feelings, for things that they can understand. And then the last one that I have is, right now we have to walk to the market every week to get our vegetables, and they can be so expensive. It would be so much more helpful if we had a garden to grow our own. And so you're feeling that frustration, you're feeling that tiredness at the fact that you have to walk to the market every single week. And it's so annoying that our vegetables are so expensive. We want to have something that's a little bit more budget friendly. And so these can be changed to be any problem that you're noticing with your students. It can be based on books, just like the first one, or stories that you're familiar with. It can be based on things that you're seeing inside of your classroom, or it can be based on bigger social issues. And so one way that this really works for us is that it allows us to build the sense of climate awareness with our students as well. And so even if this takes a little bit of time for us to get to, we can use these problems as a baseline for developing solutions later on. If we want to push an empathy into free building, why is going to be a really great place for us to start. So why are our students building? Why does your castle need that? Why did you put that piece there? Why are you building this? All of these questions are going to push our students into thinking about the different implications or the different solutions that their structures and ideas offer. So why does your castle need that? Maybe your friend's castle needs that because they want to create a space where everybody can come and play. They want to create a really big play space. Or maybe their castle needs that because they need protection from a big dragon that's outside and they're scared and they want to create a space that the dragon won't be able to get into. So all of these things, all of these questions of why are going to push our students into thinking about the emotions that are at the very beginning. So after empathize, we're going to move into define. So that is to bring focus to the specific challenge you'll be solving by framing the problem in clear and understandable terms. Understand the larger social issues to which a particular problem relates. So for students to feel connected to creating a solution, for them to really feel like they have buy-in and they're involved and they really want to solve this problem, they need to understand it. They need to tell you what the problem is. So you can work together as a group, or you can have your students work together as well in smaller groups and have your students name what the problem is, as well as why this problem is important or how it's important to bigger social contexts. You really want your students to create those definitions of what the specific problem is and see what their understanding is. You want to take the feelings and the knowledge that you've developed during Empathize, and you want to expand them. And again, whatever your students see as the problem, this could be very different than our own interpretation. Your students might see problems that we don't see, or they could be kind of misunderstanding the Empathize phase. And so we want to kind of walk through this with them and make sure that we're honoring their ideas and also understanding where they're coming from. So we're going to take each of those 3 examples that we use for Empathize. We're going to talk about the feelings, and then we're going to define what the problem is. So again, with the 3 little pigs, the feelings that we want our students to latch onto is scared and the feeling a need for safety. That feeling of being scared, maybe it's when your students fall for the first time, that can be kind of scary. That's something that they'll be able to key into. And we want to name that feeling and have them explain that feeling to us even. So we know that they're really understanding why we need to solve it. And then we're going to take this and we're going to develop it into a defined problem where we start looking at a solution as well. So the problem is that the 3 little pigs do not live in a safe structure, and we need to create a home that's going to give them protection from the big bad wolf. So the issue is that they don't have a safe home at the moment, and we're going to start kind of thinking about that solution. Next, I notice it's hard for your friend to reach that shelf, and that's really frustrating for her not to be able to access what she needs. So the problem here is that the way that we store materials makes it hard for everybody to access. There's 2 potential solutions here, and because of that, there's 2 potential problems as well. So we either need to make our materials more available, or we need to give our friend a way to access them more easily. So maybe the issue is that the materials are way too high up, or maybe the issue is that our friend doesn't have a way to get from the floor up to the materials. That kind of goes into 2 different directions that we see. And so we want to figure out what specifically our students see as the problem and then allow them to carry forward with their ideas. And then lastly, right now we have to walk a really long way to the market to get our vegetables every week, and they can be really expensive. It would be a lot easier if we had a garden to grow our own. The problem here is that it's a lot of work. It's really tiring to get this nourishing food to eat. Maybe there's a way to create a garden of some size to make this food more readily available. And so when we have our students define all of these problems, they feel really tied into the solutions that they will then be creating. In free play, when we're looking at defining, we can use provoking questions or problems that arise during building to spark this defined step. And so we want to honor and expand what our children are already doing. We don't really want to take over their play or introduce a totally new concept. Instead, we just kind of want to poke out ideas or poke out things that we're noticing that could be potential issues in their building later on. So I noticed that with the way you have these blocks stacked, your creation is getting kind of wobbly. How can we make it stronger so that your foundation, how can we make a stronger foundation so that your creation doesn't fall? We're defining a problem for our students. We're getting them to kind of start thinking about the problems that we're seeing so that they can be part of that solution and they can be part of developing that fix. After we move from defining, we're going to go into ideating. And so when we ideate, we generate multiple ideas or approaches for solving the problem, but we save evaluation of ideas for later. So that's not going to come right away. Instead, we're just going to kind of brainstorm. And this brainstorm can happen as a group, but it can also happen on an individual level or in smaller group discussions as well. You can individually write down ideas. And if you have a ton of different ideas that are happening, you can even have students vote and you can narrow down what ideas you're going to move into prototyping with. This does not need to be a super long process for students. You don't want them to develop so many ideas or go into an idea so thoroughly that it's hard for them to separate themselves from those ideas. You still want them to have an open mind when they go into creation. And so we're going to kind of keep this short and sweet. In free play, we want to ask our students questions that allow them and really push them to think about the process of what they're creating. So for me, what this looked like when I was in the classroom, a lot of times when I would bring out a material for the very first time, I would not let the students touch it right away. Instead, I would hold it or I would display it and I would ask my children, how do you think we could use these for building? Or how do you think we could use these for whatever task we have at hand? So when you bring out recycled containers for a building activity or something else, you want to ask the children first to really think about how they can be used. This is going to slow down their process and allow them to think about things in a forward way. Or in the middle of children stacking rocks, when you see that the rocks keep falling over and a student is getting really frustrated, you could say something out loud that's going to kind of provoke the student into thinking about a solution. So you could wonder, how could we get these rocks to stay up? Maybe we need to change the design. All of these things are going to allow our students to really be thinking about the process of designing, the process of creation in a way that they're going to then be able to take into their beginning phases before they even start building or touching things. Ideation is really important for our students who are naturally very impulsive. So when we're working with younger children especially, it's really hard for them to not just go straight into building because they're so excited and they can't wait to get their hands on whatever we're working with. So ideation allows us to incorporate these elements of planning and forward thinking that can be harder, especially for our younger children. Prototyping, our next phase, is going to assist in this slowdown too. So when we prototype, we build a quick sample based on one of the ideas for solving the problem. So prototyping is going to happen in a variety of ways. And this is that kiddo that we saw earlier. We're going to catch back up with him again in a little bit. But prototyping can happen through drawing sketches like you see him doing and blueprinting. We could create models. We can investigate small pieces of the design. And eventually prototyping is going to move into creation as well. It might not be creation of the full item or the full thing that we want to create, but we are going to begin to kind of tinker around with our design and see what's working. And when I say investigating small pieces of the design, I mean, if you decide that you want to use recycled cardboard to build a house and you think that you want to use it to build the roof too, maybe you just test out how pieces of cardboard kind of lean together and work together on the roof before you go into building the full thing. So there might be little chunks that you're not as positive about that you want to see at the very base level if those are going to work at all before you delve into your full design. So we're going to watch this video really quickly about prototyping. It's just a small one, and it's going to be, actually, let's see. It's just a short one, and we're going to see children prototyping in Singapore, and we're going to see kind of the full phases of the design process that are involved in this as well.
I'm Dr. Mike North. The doctor comes from having a PhD in materials science and engineering.
I'm going to give you some ideas for some prototypes. Each group is going to make a prototype.
I think we've recognized that science should play a large role in children's lives. I think we need to recognize that creativity needs to play a larger role in science.
Is a moving bed that allows people who are bedridden to move around
The most challenging part about coming up with a prototype is actually having the idea. But to have the idea, you need to identify a problem or a challenge that an idea can solve. And to have that, you need to actually be able to look at the world around you and observe and see what's missing, not what's there.
So this is it's a real life problem. I can save pockets.
Everyone, we have a folding car up here. This is incredible. Look at this.
What do you think about
One thing that I want kids to recognize about science and engineering is it's fun. It's an adventure. It's not about being in a white room with a lab coat focusing through a microscope. There's a whole world out there to explore, and science and engineering is a way to do that.
All right. So in that video, we get to see all of those students prototyping and developing different ideas. I love it when that one child said, it's a real life problem. And so we're really giving our students ways that they can address those real life problems and real world problems. But also you see the way that the prototype really needs to come from so many other steps that are introduced before it as well. So we need to understand the problem. We need to think of a solution, we need to have the idea, and also we really need to feel why this is a frustration, why this is a point of frustration. So those students probably have driven around and had struggles finding parking spots, or have heard their parents having struggles finding parking spots. And so figuring out that that's the problem that we really want to solve, and figuring out a way that we're going to do that as well. So when we're prototyping, we might see students begin to tinker with different materials as they start building, but we want to know that there is a lot of changes and rearranging that could be coming. Failure is key, and failure is so welcomed in this phase. Failure is going to be really important. And when we talk about those heavy feelings of frustration, those heavy feelings, maybe even of anger that our students could be bumping into when they're building, prototyping is going to be a really great way to bump into those feelings and to experience those heavy feelings in a way that makes it easier to overcome as well. Prototyping and testing are going to be the most obvious chunks of the design process that we're going to see in free building. And we'll see this huge loop between creation and reflection that's going to be very natural and very apparent when our students are exploring with engineering materials. And so what I mean by that is that when our students are free building, we're going to see a lot of creations fall down or even maybe get knocked over. We're going to see creations that don't really work or pan out in the way that our students wanted them to, especially when they're playing in larger groups. Whether it's for reasons of balance or for reasons of height. This prototyping and figuring out that the structure that you really wanted to build doesn't work for a variety of reasons and needs to be rebuilt. That's the loop that we see between creation and reflection. When you're building something super tall and you're noticing that it's not really staying up, when you go back to it, you're going to figure out a different way to build it instead. So questions to extend this phase of prototyping in free building. We're going to ask questions such as, how will that work? Can you tell me about that part of your structure? What happens if we put this there? Why are you using that piece or these pieces instead of those pieces? And so we really want to get our students thinking about the reason behind the specific building, the reason behind the design. Why are they doing what they're doing? And what are the engineering reasons and the building reasons as well? You might hear them use words like, oh, because I want to use a really strong foundation. And that's going to be great building reflection that they'll be able to carry on into future building as well. And then the last phase before sharing is going to be test. So when we test, we get feedback. Testing reveals what works and what doesn't, and how a prototype can be improved. So when we test out the prototype, we might return back to prototyping. Did your design fail miserably? That is totally okay. That is part of the process. And that's something that we want our students to experience, because we want them to know that you can keep building and it can continue to get better. Maybe we need to take a step back. Maybe we need to take a minute or two, but this is not an opportunity to give up. This is an opportunity to learn about what went wrong and to reflect. This is something that we as adults have to do all the time. And we want our students to begin experiencing this at young ages as well. So we can continue to tinker and make changes to the product that we want to present and that we want to use to solve our problem. And then maybe we return back to testing. But this failure could be tied to a misstep in an earlier phase. It might not just be in prototyping. So we can return to those earlier phases as much as we need to come to an effective solution. And so maybe if we think about that example of the friend who can't reach the materials and is getting really frustrated, and we want to develop, maybe we think to develop a step stool. Well, maybe our friend has a really hard time with stairs or step ladders, and she doesn't really want something that's going to get her taller. She instead wanted a solution that was going to bring the materials lower. So we needed to think of a storage solution, not a height solution. And so when we think about that, we maybe made a mistake in the empathize phase. We didn't fully understand where her frustration was coming from. So if we need to loop back and come up with a idea, that is okay. The design process is really going to be a loop depending on what our final solution is. But how can we as scientists and engineers refine and revise? This is going to be really key emotional, social emotional concepts that are important for us to touch when we're doing all of these different STEM provocations. Or you might test out the prototype and then want to show off what you've done. So again, it goes back to that receiving feedback. Are you feeling really proud of your design? You want to explain it to others or test it yourself. And when we receive feedback from our fellow engineers, scientists, peers, and designers, those are going to be the other folks in our classroom. Do you feel ready to move into sharing with your impacted community? Or do you want to make some last minute tweaks before we really delve into that phase? So we're going to finally investigate the story of this kiddo who is engaging in a different ramp provocation that we have out. And so what this child did was he came over to this magnet wall that we have. And this wall allows students to set up ramps and gutters in different ways to see how you can get balls to go down them. And so when he first approached this wall, he saw this gutter setup and he decided that he kind of wanted to tinker with it and see what he could do to get a design that he felt a little bit happier with. And that was kind of meeting his needs. So in this first phase, he is kind of prototyping. He's testing out the different materials, tinkering with them, seeing how they work, and seeing how he wants them to be arranged. So eventually, he left the area. He went over to our little art area, and he decided that he was going to prototype in a different way, and he was going to build or draw a blueprint or a sketch of what he wanted this design to look like. So then he comes back, he's got his sketch and he's designing again. And so he's again prototyping, he's figuring out different ways that he wants this to be set up according to the sketch that he had come up with and according to the ideas that he had come up with while he was first engaging in that one row ramp. And then finally, we see that he's able to engage in some testing. And so he's able to see how the ball goes down according to his different ideas. And so this whole process can be a really enriching and engaging experience for our students. This is a child whose teacher was watching him do this and said that she had never seen him engage in play in this way before. The focus that he was demonstrating and the passion that he was putting into this project that he had fully decided to do for himself was not something that she'd seen him engage in the past in the classroom. And so when we give our students opportunities to really feel and understand and feel connected to the problem or to what they're designing with, we're giving them opportunities to really show us what they're capable of and to enjoy the play and learning that's happening. And then finally, our last step is going to be to share. So once a final product has been created, explain the invention in a way that allows others to make use of it. So this is really when we share it out to the community as well, or maybe we go from sharing it with a small group of our peers to then sharing it with everybody. And so part of sharing is being really, really proud of what we've created. We want our students to feel like they are capable inventors and capable creators, and also like what they've done is amazing and it's something to be celebrated and something to be proud of. So you can see this child posing with what she's created in a way that she's really proud of, and that's really awesome. We want to give our students those moments of pride when they are creating and building. Part of sharing is opening up to feedback, and another part is presenting a design that other people will be able to utilize. So you want to prepare your students in the building process to talk about their designs and creations. Allow the students to provide the first definition rather than naming something yourself. So rather than you saying, oh, I like your boat, we are not sure that that's a boat until the students tell us. We don't want to name what they've done. We want students to provide us what they've done. We want them to provide us with that name. And so this is all ways that we can do this in free building as well. When you're free building, you can say to students, can you tell me about this? Or your structure looks amazing. I can tell that you've put so much work into it. Can you describe to me what you've done? You can also say, are you still working or are you done for right now? I'd love to hear about this part right here. So we're using really broad and open terms that allow students to put the words into our mouths and to continue asking those questions. So can you describe what you've done? Then they might say, oh, I built a boat. We might have walked up to that boat and thought it was a house, but it is a boat because our students are able to define it for us. And then we can ask them about their boat and ask them about the different pieces in it. So overall, building and designing, when we look at this whole process and how we can ingrain it in our free builds as well, we want to open our students up for engineering and construction opportunities right now, which is going to prime them for engaging in this design process later and really thinking through different problems. The design process is even something that we as teachers do all the time. And so if we have a problem with maybe getting one specific student to engage, we're going to do all of these steps, even if we don't necessarily realize that we're doing each of the specific ones. We're going to prototype and we're going to test and we're going to see if these specific skills or ideas work to engage that student. And then we might return to earlier phases and think of different engagement opportunities or ideas. So we're doing this all the time, and we can prepare students to do these things later in life by engaging them in these processes now. We also are combining STEM skills, which are so important for our students to bump up to, but also social emotional benefits when we provide them with those enriching opportunities to build and design in ways that are both a little bit more structured and also free play. We're giving them opportunities to explore all of those different concepts. And then lastly, when we build and design, we're giving our students really key opportunities to practice skills that are going to be pivotal in their futures and pivotal in roles that they will take on later on, especially when we come to addressing climate change. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, whether it's all 3 webinars that you've come to or just today. We've covered the value of play, using repurposed materials, and designing and building all for STEM in the ECD classroom. I would just like to say a huge thank you to the Play Africa team for having us on and for allowing us to be part of the launch of the STEM Seeds curriculum. We've been so excited to be here with all of you and to be engaged with a community of people who are so excited to learn and really play with students. So thank you again. I'm going to stop sharing, and then if anybody has any questions about this or any of the other pieces of the presentations before, you can drop them into the chat or in the Q&A.
Thank you, Emma. That was so great.
Thank you.
Yep. So as Emma said, if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat. As a reminder, this week, if you're attending today, you'll get an email from me and that will have links to these recordings. They'll be available for a limited time on the Play Africa YouTube page. And you'll get those again later this week. Any questions about building or from the previous sessions too, using repurposed materials or the importance and value of play?
Oh, and actually, I did want to share something. So I know people are logging off, but I'll just push this up really quick. So this is from the Purdue Extension, and this, I think, gives really, really great ideas for some homemade blocks. So for anybody who's still logged on, this is called Creating Homemade Blocks for Children. And so you see different examples of repurposed materials that you can use to create different shapes. So there's food boxes, you can tape them up. There's also different cylinders that you can use from repurposed food containers, as long as they're cleaned. And then you can use different pieces for cones and triangles as well. Planks come from cardboard all the time. And then other shapes are always really valuable too, these random kind of mismatched containers that you might find. All of these things are going to be really valuable when it comes to creating repurposed blocks. And there's no real developmental difference between repurposed blocks that you create and blocks that you're able to buy. Whatever you've got and whatever you're able to use with your students is going to be really awesome and is going to provide the same developmental benefits that you see. So, yeah.
So there's a question. What do you find most suitable to stick boxes together? What materials do you use?
Okay, so if you're sticking boxes together, like the food containers and stuff that you want to create and have them be more durable for the future, I love tape, but I also have used like wrapping paper too, to just kind of wrap them on the outside if you've got a box that's kind of falling apart. If you've got like paper bags or any type of bag that you have, you can kind of wrap the outside of it with something that'll keep it together more, especially when you see the edges fraying. And that's something that you can redo over and over again. So if you do wrap it up and then in a few months you see that that's kind of wearing down, you can wrap it again. If you've got tape, you can use that. But if not, glue is also going to be fine. You could even probably use a rubber band. I think with the rubber bands too, then you can provide a little bit more adherence when children are stacking also.
Mm-hmm. My girls like to use press stick to put everything together.
Is press stick like tape, like double-sided stickers, or?
No, it's like, imagine like a sticky Play-Doh.
Oh, like a sticky tack.
Yeah, sticky tack. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. Could definitely do that.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, thank you again, Emma. This was so lovely.
You. No, we've
and
loved
thank you for all of you for coming, and look forward to that email from me. If you think of any questions later, you can always respond to the email from me.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.